My fellow exiles, the state of Path of Exile 2 is strong. Insanely steady Steam player numbers, the richest, probably most influential person in the world playing the game and spoiling the final boss fight for thousands. Meta builds more spammy than most Path of Exile 1 characters being squashed like the bugs they are. Everyone collectively freaking out, either loving the Trials of Ascension or despising them. This is the majority. And nearly everyone, yes, including myself, realizing the first 3 acts of Path of Exile 2 are nothing like Cruel Mode and the Endgame, which play more like Path of Exile 1.35. I'm gonna say it. Path of Exile 2's early access launch has surpassed all hyper-positive expectations set by myself, the community en masse, and yes, even Grinding Your Games, despite obvious problems and obvious points of feedback. We need to remember, we are 14 whole days into the game's massive beta period, which actually surpasses the entire life cycle of some modern blockbuster games, and things are going great despite slabs of good feedback, truly ridiculous hate for the game that I believe is mostly unfounded, and some people playing an ungodly amount of time during these 2 weeks. I am one of those people. Welcome to the first State of Wraeclast report for Path of Exile 2, continuing the series we began in Settlers of Kalgur. This video is your one-stop shop for all things Path of Exile 2 and Grinding Your Games these first 2 weeks of early access and beyond, from a fatally excitable and optimistic individual. The major heated topics of debate flaming on about PoE2, the current class and ascendancy meta and the biggest nerfs, the best pieces of helpful knowledge, highlighting some excellent pieces of PoE2 content and some extremely annoying ones too. Hello, Elon. My big Path of Exile 2 conclusions so far and more. Salmon Exiles, Talkative Try here. Welcome to the most positively unhinged Path of Exile 2 channel on the planet. Please like the video if you like the content and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this, as well as some experimental ideas. Both are 100% free and the best ways to help the channel grow. Thank you. Now, on to the ridiculous state of Path of Exile 2 2 weeks in to early access, beginning with the consistency of Path of Exile 2, something almost unseen in the gaming industry. What you are looking at here are the Steam chart numbers for Path of Exile 2, the first 2 weeks of early access. At a glance, you can immediately see the peak of 578,000, which was hit that first week, has not been beaten yet, but the player number consistency is ridiculous if you look at the waves right here. The peaks and valleys these first 2 weeks are incredibly consistent, and this is unheard of in a video game, except for Marvel Rivals, which actually released on the very same day as Path of Exile 2. If you look at Path of Exile 1, if you look at Last Epoch, if you look at Diablo 4, the numbers do not match up with this. It's remarkable, especially given this is an early access title that is paid. It's not free to play. It at a minimum costs $30 or you being gifted a key, and I believe that is the vast minority of players. We also have to remember, these Steam player numbers are only with Steam. And Path of Exile 2 has a standalone client, which I use, and it's also on console. I'd reckon that the Steam player numbers are probably the plurality of players. I'd imagine that the concurrent players on the other platforms follow this same sort of trend, and that is remarkable. Now, Grinding Your Games has not commented on any of this really, except for saying this has been the biggest launch for them ever, which was apparent through the Steam numbers alone. These Steam numbers dwarf the numbers of any Path of Exile 1 expansion or launch. They are truly remarkable. And even though it's certain that the player numbers will continue to drip for the next few weeks and months, it will be a true test of Path of Exile 2 when we get that first big content patch, which should include the Druid and the Huntress classes, as well as some extra content as well, probably for the Endgame, probably other skill gems for existing classes, maybe some more of the Axe. We will really need to see if the peak matches the current all-time, or if it trails under it. I think there's been a lot of buzz around this game, and obviously there's been a good chunk of divisiveness about the difficulty of the game and the onboarding of new players. But these numbers right here showcase that something is making people stick to Path of Exile 2. Now, maybe a lot of these players haven't hit the end game where I believe a lot of the valid critiques are taking place, and once they do, the player numbers will trail off. But when Grinding Your Games is trying to do, and I think has successfully done with Path of Exile 2, is introduce the game to a brand new audience of player, and these players are loving the game so far. They are trudging through Acts 1 through 3 and breaking into Cruel and falling in love with the gameplay of Path of Exile 2. I have a ton of personal anecdotes that do confirm this, but I have no real data to truly back up that hypothesis, so I'm just gonna let it sit. Might there be something else that is causing this very stable set of player numbers in Path of Exile 2? If you think there is, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your takes. I really do think as more people hit the end game, which is a very different experience compared to the first 3 acts especially, stuff will begin to trail off. But then again, that does correlate a lot with Path of Exile 1 and the trend of graphs in that game. And the Path of Exile 1 comparisons to Path of Exile 2 have been among some of the hottest debated topics in all the Path of Exile 2 community these past 2 weeks, and that is what we are going to discuss next. We have a set of amazing topics right here that we are going to chug through one by one, beginning with the Trials of Ascension, which I am going to have a full dedicated video on, dissecting all sides of the debate. But early numbers and feedback are trending in the direction that most players do not like the Trials of Ascension, those being the Trial of the Sekima and the Trial of Chaos, with a third being added to the game in good time, probably the Trial of the Ancestors from 3.22 Path of Exile 1 League. So, why is this happening? A lot of players do not enjoy the fact that a huge amount of player power is locked behind something that is fundamentally different from a lot of Path of Exile 2. I would argue that both Trial of the Sekima and Trial of Chaos do relate a lot more to the first 3 acts of Path of Exile 2 than Endgame, which is very different to the rest of Path of Exile 2. But still, that is not to belittle the fact that these are definitely different, and I totally understand that. And some people hate that, and some people love that. So how is Grinding Your Games going to synthesize that information? I think one of the biggest issues that people are having is with the RNG of the trials. And those are the modifiers you get on the Trial of Chaos that can brick your run like that, and those are the afflictions that you can get in the Trial of the Sekima that also destroy your run. Now, some people can be very, very lucky, especially in the Trial of the Sekima, and get boons that completely trivialize the content. That happened to me when I went for my 3rd set of ascendancy points just last night. Other people do not have the luck, and they just get affliction after affliction, and they stack up and they destroy all possibilities of them achieving their ascendancy points. This also is unfortunate that the Trial of the Sekimas is heavily against melee characters mostly. Melee, even though Grinding Your Games released a patch addressing this partially, is still at a severe disadvantage when it comes to the Trial of the Sekimas because of how honor works. I think there's still some tuning that needs to be done here, and warrior players especially are feeling the struggle trying to get through all of these bosses without powerful boons to help them get to the end. Now, Grinding Your Games has put some tools in the game that might not be apparent to a lot of players, so I will share those tools now. And those are relics. If you are struggling to get your ascendancy points, you can stack up honor resistance for the Trial of the Sekimas using these relics. Even if you just clear Trials 1 and 2, which I do believe are the easiest, even if you just clear the first floor of the Trial of the Sekima, you can get a decent chunk of honor resistance, upwards of 60-70% from relics that you find yourself or relics that you buy from trade. And if you get your honor resistance up there, as long as you get no afflictions that absolutely end your run, you have a very good shot of making it through the first 3 floors of the Trial of the Sekima. I have not experienced the 4th floor yet. I still have no spoilers on the boss. I've heard it's awesome and very difficult. I will have more thoughts when I get there. But I do agree that both the Trial of the Sekima and especially the Trial of Chaos need work, even if I enjoy the experience massively. And I enjoy both of these systems being very distinct from the rest of Path of Exile 2. Like I said at the top of this section, the big problem lots of players are having is that a big chunk of their character power is locked behind this, and they literally just cannot beat it, or they feel as though they cannot beat it. Maybe their build isn't strong enough. Maybe their play style just doesn't mesh with it. Maybe they just can't do it. They just can't, or they refuse to interact with it. And if that happens, you get players that just quit the game because of this. And I'm sure grinding your games does not want that. And it's something that I've seen happen a lot as I've asked about player experiences with both the trials. These trials enrage the players and they nope out. I think there's a big difference between the game being difficult or engaging and two distinct systems in the game fundamentally making players quit without recourse. So there is some work that needs to be done there. I think addressing the RNG situations will help a lot. Pointing players in the direction of honor resistance for Trial of Sekima on relics might help a lot. But I'm sure there will be some other ingenuities that Grinding Your Games comes up with. I do hope that they do not remove the trials or change them so fundamentally that they are unrecognizable. But there is a lot of distaste with the trials. So maybe it's a possibility. But I do hope Grinding Your Games stands their ground and just makes good changes in response to the feedback. Wow, that was a big first hot button issue. Let's talk about difficulty of the game now, which is also a very controversial topic. It's one that I think will fade with time, because right now we are at the lowest levels of player knowledge possible in a game like Path of Exile, wherein player knowledge is huge, even in Path of Exile 2. And the more players understand about the game, the more powerful players will become. And with Path of Exile 2, this player knowledge issue, or lack thereof of player knowledge, is also being mixed with skill. Because yes, in Path of Exile 2, you can outscale bosses, especially in Acts 1 through 3, wherein the game is the hardest it has been for me, and I am in tier 11 Waystones right now. I liked that challenge. A lot of people are frustrated by that challenge and voicing those frustrations. I do think those will fade with time as player knowledge continues to peak and creep up and up and up, and that will outscale the skill that you can use to overcome these challenges. I am not saying skill issue here. I am not skilled. I have killed 2 bosses across all of FromSoft titles like Elden Ring and Dark Souls. I could not play those games. They were far too frustrating. I can confidently say that I have not outskilled most of these bosses. I have outgeared or outknowledged a lot of these bosses, especially in Cruel and the Endgame. I think at the beginning of Path of Exile 2, wherein people might not be getting the drops they need to progress, they can hit that wall like this, and it can feel like it's a skill issue. But what's really going on is that they don't have the gear necessary to really take on these challenges without using skill as the brute force metric. Where in a game like Path of Exile 2, an ARPG, you do expect to be able to farm out this gear. And sometimes luck is just not on your side, and that sucks. And that kind of shifts us into the balance topic right now, which is another hot issue, because a lot of stuff seems unbalanced, especially when it comes to melee versus range, the great debate. Some people think melee is still bad, some people think melee is great. A lot of people are still experimenting with the passive tree and which gems are best. So I actually don't think balance is something that is a huge concern in early access, when we know a lot of it will be changing as the game progresses. Grinding Your Games is going to see, okay, there's a disparity here within classes. Okay, everybody's choosing this certain keystone. Everybody's going for a vision, and they will hopefully balance all this stuff out. I expect a lot of changes coming in the first big content patch, whether that's February or March, and a lot of these balance issues will likely be addressed directly by Grinding Your Games. They want to make sure that balance is in a great state because they want a diversity of play styles in this game. They don't want everybody to just be playing Deadeyes or Sorceresses. They want all 36 Eventual Ascendancy classes to see a good deal of playtime. Same with all the classes. They're not going to want to pigeonhole people into certain places because balance is out of whack. So I think there are a lot of balance issues being raised right now, and Not being a build whiz or anything, someone who's just reading all of this balanced stuff, I do tend to agree that there is some imbalanced stuff in the game. And then, do we want to talk about crafting or identifying with extra steps in Path of Exile 2? Because that's something that was coined by Palsteron, and I totally agree with him at this point. There is not a ton of crafting right now in the game, and that is by design. You can meta craft somewhat in Endgame if you spend an ungodly amount of currency on omens from Ritual, but aside from that, you are identifying items or you are building up a white item and praying as you slam on a transmutation orb, an aug orb, a regal, and then a few exalts, and hoping you get amazing modifiers. There is no real crafting besides that for the vast majority of the player base. And while I have not interacted with trade, I know a lot of people who may be crafting stuff themselves in a game like Path of Exile, or at least last Epoch, now relying heavily on trade to gear their characters, especially to fix simple issues like resistances. So I think right now crafting is super rudimentary, and that is obvious. And the rune system is not the solution that grinding your games stated it would be, at least from my perspective. It's supposed to replace the crafting bench and allow you to fix those early game problems like resistances with ease. But the crafting bench was something that you could use like that, with ease, with almost no repercussions. The rune system is not like that. You need to make sure you have runes in your armor. You can't overwrite said runes, so if you solve a resistance issue with a new piece of gear, you can't overwrite the old runes in another piece of armor that you want to keep in there. So you're kind of stuck until you can get a new piece of armor that you can then put new runes in that do solve the new issue that you have because of your new piece of gear. I think runes just need a lot of changes. They at least need to allow you to overwrite runes or take runes out or something. I don't like this unchanging aspect of your gear that is putting too much friction into the game. I like friction, but not that much of it with something as simple as just swapping out pieces. I believe it's bringing in the problems that we had in Path of Exile 1 with the gem socket system into Path of Exile 2. And that is a bad thing in my eyes. And speaking of bringing things into Path of Exile 1 into Path of Exile 2, the endgame. Path of Exile 2's endgame is oddly reminiscent of Path of Exile 1's. The campaign experience was phenomenal for me. Cruel was super easy and super fast. I got through Act 1 Cruel in about an hour, which was crazy. Everything was just melting and dying. And then I got into the endgame of Path of Exile 2, and basically the same thing was happening, except I'm not fighting any bosses anymore, which was the best part of the Path of Exile 2 campaign. And the progress has slowed down substantially if I don't use trade in terms of gear progression. So I'm just blasting through maps, killing lots of monsters, going through these layouts, looking for rares, rarely finding bosses, and getting mobbed in the league mechanics like Breach or Ritual, just like in Path of Exile 1. It was a shock to me once I reached the end game. It's a system that a lot of people may have reached much faster than me, and instantly we're seeing the cracks in Path of Exile 2, at least in its initial vision. Right now, I feel like I have stepped back into Path of Exile 1, and as a Path of Exile 1 lover, I'm not that upset. But as a Path of Exile 2 enjoyer, especially in the campaign, I am taken aback, because I do feel like I was ready for a completely different ARPG experience in Path of Exile 2. I was consuming all the dev content. I was talking with the devs. I was in the communities. I was funneling it all into myself. And I knew what I was going to get in the Path of Exile 2 campaign in Acts 1 through 3. And that's what I got. And I loved it. And then I got to Cruel and I was like, oh, man, this is different. And then I got to Endgame and I thought, wait a second. This isn't different. This is just Path of Exile 1. What is going on? And I'm not sure if that's intentional from the developers or if it's not intentional. And this is just a placeholder until they get the rest of the acts into the game. So you have a steady progression set and they change the way that the Atlas works. Because right now, you are just blasting through stuff looking for rares. You are rarely fighting bosses, and that makes me really sad. It's a very intense experience because of the one portal situation, but I don't think it's as frightening or as stressful as many people were making it out to be, aside from that one thing. You are stressed because you can potentially just lose the map, but otherwise the gameplay is very chill. You're not really paying attention to anything besides the on-death effects, which are incredibly threatening. Everything else, you can be mitigated with your defenses. And I was a much bigger fan of needing to pay attention to the monster pack fights and the constant boss battles during the campaign. And I do hope that design seeps into Path of Exile 2's endgame eventually. Or the curve is flattened a little bit more, and you're not instantly flying up to godlike levels of power into the endgame. I do understand an ARPG is meant to fulfill that power fantasy, but I do think that the Path of Exile 2 power progression is just too swift right now in the endgame. And lots of people also agree. And lots of people also love what they're seeing because they are big Path of Exile 1 enjoyers. If both of these games are going to be supported in the future, and they are, Path of Exile 2's endgame should be distinct. Speaking of more distinction needed, what I have up right now are the leaderboards or ladders for Path of Exile 2 as of today, 2 weeks into early access. We have them for standard, which is trade, hardcore, also trade, solo self-found, which is not hardcore, no trade, and hardcore SSF. The numbers here are very interesting if you look at the top 1,000, which is what we will do in a moment. But you can see even just in the top 10 of this standard leaderboard, we see Stormweaver dominating with 6 of the 10 spots. Then if you look at hardcore, we see a bunch of Infernalists. This is a crazy amount. 7 of the top 10 are Infernalists. And then if you look at solo self-found, we got Stormweavers, Invokers, 1 Titan, and hardcore, 2 Infernalists, a Blood Mage, a Titan, and a Deadeye. What this tells me is in hardcore, Infernalists are pretty dang tanky and strong. I'm very curious to see what might be driving this. If you know, leave a comment below. And then for standard, Stormweavers are just blasting. Deadeyes are blasting too. I am shocked to not see more Deadeyes in the top 10. But if we go on over to this chart right here, which is a comparison of the top 1,000 ladder from just a week ago, so it's looking at the current week. This is posted by Talkative. We have 423 Stormweavers in the top 1,000, 176 Deadeyes, which is down 44% from 1 weekend, 138 Infernalists, which is also down, 137 Invokers, which is up 69%, nice. And then less Titans, but still it's in the top 5. And then all the other ascendancies. This person points out something very interesting. The top 4 ascendancies of the ladder represent 87.4% of the total number of players in the ladder. Meaning Stormweaver, Deadeye, Infernalist, and Invoker are the 4 strongest current ascendancies in the game. I think this also harkens back to what we were just talking about with Path of Exile 2's endgame and how similar it is to Path of Exile 1. I haven't been consuming a ton of content, but I have been playing an Invoker myself, and just looking at the names, Deadeye and Stormweaver sound oddly reminiscent of Path of Exile 1 classes. Obviously, the Deadeye is a Path of Exile 1 ascendancy class, and I would be supposing that people are blasting through the current version of the endgame on these, clearing maps at rapid speed, destroying monsters before they even touch them, blowing up screens with ease, and everything else throughout here just can't accomplish that nearly as well as these top 5. If I am completely wrong, please chastise me in the comments. I would love to know, but I think my intuition is correct on that front. Then I just had to point out this hilarious build I saw on the Path of Exile 2 Reddit from Mythology, which he is using through the campaign to one-shot campaign bosses using the snipe skill. Obviously, he has a bunch of other skills that he's comboing together with this, which are listed on screen in just a moment. But using this, he is destroying bosses in the game. Here's the guy, Channel Bonestorm, Sniper's Mark. And then what happens? Instantly destroyed. It's beautiful to see people finding interactions like this. And I'm not sure if Grinding Gear Games is going to delete this from the game. It's very possible that it does happen. It's not as egregious and spammy as something like the cast on crit and cast on freeze Comet build that was showcased by Jean Groen. But it is incredibly strong, and I could see the Grinding Gear Games tab coming down on this one. Speaking of potential nerfs, there have been some big nerfs so far in early access, including the infamous cast on freeze, cast on crit Comet build. There was some wild stuff going on screen, and it was deleted from the game. And Grinding Gear Games has made their stance clear on this matter. If something is so overpowered that nobody else wants to play anything else besides that, they are likely going to hotfix it before the next big content patch. If something is just broken due to interactions that are meant to be there and aren't clear bugs or aren't clearly breaking the game, they're not going to touch those. They released this manifesto in their latest patch note cycle, in which they deleted or nerfed a few more builds from the game. Besides the Comet build, there have been a few other builds that have been brought down in power, such as the gas grenades build. I know skeletal arsonists were touched a little bit as well, but there haven't been a wide variety of builds that are being just bang, destroyed. Odds are, if you're playing something made by Jung, it is probably going to get touched by Grinding Gear Games, as we'll talk about in just a moment. Before we get to some based and bad Path of Exile 2 content so far, I thought I would take a moment to help out some new players or veteran players that don't know about these incredibly helpful quality of life tips that will instantly improve your game experience. Truly, there are legions of brand new players playing Path of Exile 2 without having played Path of Exile 1 or other ARPGs before, so here is a slew of very quick tips that you can begin using immediately. You can hold Control plus left click on vendors to utilize their special actions without needing to go through the dialogue options. For example, Control plus left click the Hooded One or Doriani to identify all items in your inventory immediately. Hold Control plus Alt plus left click for secondary NPC options too. There's no need to drop items to and from your stash or shops. Hold Control plus left click to immediately transfer or buy things. Hold Shift while in the passive skill tree to see the effect a node will have on your character's current state. Uncheck recommended gems while in the support gem cutting menu to showcase all gems that can be used currently by your selected skill gem. Try out your hideout ASAP. For most people, this is in the endgame, where you must find a node on the atlas to unlock it. In your hideout, you can basically create your own customized town. If you log out in your hideout, you log right back into it. Always check shops, even in endgame. They can contain some busted rare items and they refresh when you level. That's a very short list of the top tips. Make sure to leave your own in the comments below. Thank you. I now need to call out some people based on their Path of Exile 2 content so far. Okay, maybe not some people. Maybe just one person. The only person whose content has actually enraged me. All the other content I've seen has been banging. Subtractim has been putting out very pointed videos helping players of all skill levels fine-tune their characters. Localhole has been voicing very valid feedback and trying to figure out whether or not Grinding Gear Games is overthinking Path of Exile 2. Dreamcore is busting out a whack off meta build. You need to go check this out. Jungroan has been helping Grinding Gear Games find the most broken, overpowered builds in the game to ensure every initial class is fine-tuned before the Druid and Huntress release in a few months. Crip put out a ruthless review of Path of Exile 2 that truly made me sit and think. Camille is uploading a bunch of his original soundtrack for Path of Exile 2 onto his YouTube channel. They are beautiful. However, the one individual who has pissed me off beyond belief, love him, hate him, don't care about him, it's Elon Musk. We're going to stay apolitical here and only talk about Path of Exile 2. Undoubtedly, Elon playing Path of Exile 2 has only been extremely helpful for the game. He's exposing it to a massive audience, and that's likely helping out Grinding Gear Games substantially. That's good. What's not good is trying to avoid everything to do with the final bosses within Path of Exile 2 as I slowly progress through the acts. Normal, cruel, and up to tier 11 waystones, and now, at the top of my feed, I've now seen multiple posts about the final pinnacle boss of the game, forced there by the man himself, Elon Musk. I've hidden posts about it multiple times. I've asked to not be recommended this post. But alas, it keeps appearing there. Fortunately, I just know the name and have seen a bit of the fight, and I know this is a super silly and almost meaningless to many, but I really wanted to go into this blind. It's my fault. It's my fault for using social media. I thought I'd set up a sufficient defensive barrier. I was wrong. So please, if you'd like to avoid anything about the current pinnacle encounter of PoE2, stay away from Twitter or X. Okay, here is the heavy opinion section of Path of Exile 2. It's my conclusion about the game 2 weeks into early access. The game is a huge win. However, the game changes substantially when you transition from Acts 1 to 3 normal mode and into Cruel, and then again once you hit Endgame and the Atlas. This, for many, including myself, is a massive shift, a shift that occurs too fast. Echoing my thoughts from earlier in the video, I really feel like I'm playing Path of Exile 1 when I'm playing the Endgame. And when I was playing the Cruel Axe, I felt like I was playing Path of Exile 1 too, just at a lesser degree. I love Path of Exile 1. I have played the Endgame for thousands of hours, but Path of Exile 2's initial 3 acts felt so good. I had an incredible time. Everything just felt handcrafted and perfect, even though there were some issues occurring there. And I thought the rest of the game would echo that same experience. And unfortunately, what happened is that experience almost completely faded. Now, I have not faced the pinnacle encounters in Path of Exile 2, so it might be echoed there as well. But as far as I am currently into the game, I am not feeling that same joy and that same passion I felt when playing those first 3 acts. Perhaps this is just a me problem. Perhaps this is just me not understanding that an ARPG is going to flip a switch and then you are going to get much more powerful. But I really think that has a place in Path of Exile 2. But I don't feel like I've earned it. I'm having fun. I'm having a blast. But I think I would be having a better time if Path of Exile 2 at Endgame was more like the Path of Exile 2 of Acts 1 through 3. I've seen this in multiple Twitch chats, in my Discord channel, and I agree with it. Path of Exile 2's first 3 acts is Path of Exile 2. It's what I was sold, it's what I was excited about. And Path of Exile 2's Cruel Mode and Endgame is just Path of Exile 1, or Path of Exile 1.5. And I can't say that that's a good thing. I can't. Even if I enjoy it, I really want the 2 games to be distinct. And I hope Grinding Gear Games takes this feedback and listens to it and tries to suss out what exactly the best path forward is. Obviously, it's difficult because lots of people do prefer that more super fast-paced game style of Path of Exile 1, and they're probably happy that it already exists in Path of Exile 2. But from everything I've read or listened to about Path of Exile 2, that wasn't supposed to happen this fast. We're 2 weeks in, and we're already zooming. We're zooming really, really quick. Whew, that was quite the video, everybody. Even if those are my final thoughts on the game as it stands right now, I am still blasting, I am still playing, I'm live streaming every Tuesday and Thursday. I have podcasts lined up all the way till February right now, and I have some big things in the works, including a lovely new background here, a new desk, lots of stuff going on. Very excited. If you like this type of content, if you like my channel, if you like me, make sure to like the video and to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for all of your support. I could not do this without you. I will see you in the next video. My fellow exiles, stay sane.